So, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am Paul Morrow here on the Ops Desk, and today we have a great pod. We have Isabel Vincent. You see her writing for the New York Post, and also her co-writer on Gold Bar Bob, the story of Bob Menendez, the senator from New Jersey who's currently doing federal time. Tom, welcome to you as well to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Paul. Really appreciate it.
So this is going to be really interesting because, it couldn't come at a more timely moment. We're having so many investigations going on, but this is one of the ones, you see the gripes online. Everybody's being investigated, but nobody ever gets convicted and locked up. Well, this is a case that went all the way through. So I'm going to put it out to you guys, whichever one of you wants to respond, or both. But I think the main question now is the following. Give us the contours of the case that finally took him down, because he was a slippery guy and he beat the previous case. How did they finally get him?
Tom, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I think and we talked about this when the trial started, and we had a debate about, what would the prosecutors do in their opening, statement, and we said, if they hand out those gold bars to the jury, it's going to be a tough case.
Yeah.
And I think just giving those jurors those gold bars to have in their hands, where they could see, whoa, and to see the pictures of cash in his boots and in his jacket pockets. I think that ultimately is what got him, because before this, people could debate about what kind of benefits he was getting. So it was like a vacation off to some Caribbean island or a hotel stay in Paris. And you can imagine that if you're a juror, but to have a gold bar in your hand and to know, hey, he was paid with this, that's a totally different, bucket of fish. And so that, I think, is what ultimately really got him, what was just the evidence in those gold bars.
Isabel, you feel the same way?
Yeah, definitely. It's one thing to actually hold the gold bullion in your hands, but I'm going to add another thing. His first trial was held in a federal court in New Jersey, which is home turf for him. This one, the gold bar trial, was in Southern District in New York.
Right.
So these are people that are not beholden to him, who, were completely just looking at the facts, like people he could not control. So I think that was another reason that he was convicted. It was they really went after him with the facts of the case. I mean, I like to think that, and the first trial, which was had to do with his benefactor, the eye doctor, who had given him,
Right.
what Tom said, the free stay at the hotel in Paris, among, other things, and $600,000. That, that was harder to get your head around as a juror.
So we had the first case. It happens in New Jersey. He has some influence there. Did the DOJ cognizantly move the case to New York for the reasons you're talking about, Isabel?
I mean, yes, because all of the players in this case, and Tom, I know will want to add something, but all the players in this case were from New Jersey. So you had his co-defendants, who included his wife, Nadine Menendez, the Egyptian American businessman, Wael Hana, and the Palestinian American businessman, Fred Davies. They were all based in, across the river in New Jersey. So it would logically make sense to have it in federal court in New Jersey.
Right. Tom?
Yeah, and I think the other thing was in his first corruption trial with Dr. Melgen, the prosecutors tried to have the case in Washington, D.C. And he had a much better lawyer in that case, Abby Lowell, who was able to get that thing forced into New Jersey. And he did a really good job as an attorney to keep that thing out of D.C. So definitely the prosecutors wanted to stay as far away as possible from New Jersey, even in the first case, definitely in the second one. So that's why Southern District happened. No doubt about it.
That's interesting. Lowell, of course, being the attorney who ultimately ends up representing Hunter Biden.
Yep.
And he is sort of the go-to cleaner upper for the Democrats these days. And lately he's had a little bit of a mixed record, but undoubtedly a skilled and high-powered attorney. So he beats the first case, and we don't need to go into that because he defeated it. But the second case, they move it to New York. Now, full disclosure, I know. Well, I haven't talked to him in a long time, but I knew the head of public corruption in New York, and I'm going to be frank. I wouldn't want him chasing me if I had done something because this is an expert attorney and public corruption in the Southern District of New York in terms of the DOJ is kind of top of the food chain. I'm sure they figured out a way to get venue through the banks or something like that. They move it over to New York. So, Tom, let's stay with you right now. Give us the contours of the case relative to the conviction. Like, what is he accused of having done? I know he gets the gold bars, it's a very lurid detail, but what was the exchange here that ultimately sinks him?
Well, yeah, so 16 counts overall was what he was charged with, and they were various charges, everything from a couple of counts of acting as a foreign agent for Egypt and for Qatar,
Mm,
a count of violating the public service duty clause. I forget the exact name for that. A
mm.
few conspiracy charges. So
There's a bribery charge.
bribery charges. So he had 16 counts total. He ended up being convicted, like we said. He got 11 years, which at his age, 80 years old, that's a pretty steep prison sentence. And the bottom line is, coming into the trial, if you look at the timing of the investigation by the feds, their investigation started up almost right after he beat the Melgen trial. So he gets out of that. He makes this big announcement that he's resurrected, and
Mm.
he's not going to forget his enemies. And he jumps right back into the hot pot and immediately starts to do dealings with the Egyptians, with Wild Hana, this street guy from the Middle East, Fred Davies, his wife Nadine. He starts to just do all these crazy things right after he gets out of the Melgen thing.
The
And
Belgian being the first trial?
exactly. So that
Right.
ended in 2017 in the hung jury. So he didn't really get off. He wasn't found innocent. It was a hung jury.
Right.
And the Trump administration decided not to retry.
Mm.
But right after that trial ended, he started his shenanigans almost immediately. And immediately he got picked up by the feds. They got him in a restaurant there one time at Morton's in D.C., where they were there to actually surveil another individual, but Bob's wife was so loud and boisterous with the Egyptians that the feds were out there and said, "Well, we might as well record this. What's this here?" And they got her, on video, telling the Egyptians, "What else can my love do for you guys?"
Oh my
So
God.
so the situation in this case was much different, because in the Melgen case you had things of travel, and you had rumors of underage sex with prostitutes in the
Right.
Dominican Republic,
DR.
and you
Yeah.
had you had these supermodels who were getting visas through Menendez, and all this weird stuff was going on. But what you didn't have in that first case that you have in this second trial, right, is you had real criminal elements, where you had Fred Davies doing real bank fraud, right?
Mm.
You had Jose Uribe, one of the co-defendants, who flipped on
Who
Bob.
flipped on
He
Rick?
was facing real insurance fraud. This guy was a real criminal, okay? Wild Hana, another true real criminal. You had his wife Nadine Menendez, who in the book we talk about how she was known for being sort of a psycho Barbie in the community down in New Jersey, where ex-boyfriends were like, "Hey man, she will stalk you." And
Hmm.
we have where she was arrested by the police department going to an ex-boyfriend's house on Christmas Day
Oh
to
God.
yell at the guy, right? So Menendez surrounded himself with criminal elements, with a psycho Barbie wife in Nadine Menendez, and they all started having these meetings with the Egyptians, and money started flying around, and the feds picked it up immediately. So this case, it started. It looks like the investigation started almost right after his other case ended, and this thing, they monitored him. He ended up being raided 5 different times. This was a much more serious case, much more elements of criminality. It was just on a totally different level.
Right. So, look, the feds do not like to lose cases. And the fact that the first case ended up in a hung jury, The question becomes, do we retry this? As you say, the Trump administration DOJ decided not to, but that undoubtedly stung. And then when they realized he's still doing it, he just seems to have not backed off, that they're going to keep going. So, Isabel, let me come to you because Tom brings up an interesting dynamic in this thing, which is the wife. And I think a lot of people on the outside of the case, just looking at your reporting in the New York Post and reporting elsewhere, got the sense that, you know what, maybe he was trying to please his wife here. I know she gets arrested as well. It's a separate trial. Give us the dynamic there and give me that dynamic legally. Did they flip the wife against him? I know that was two separate trials. Are they talking? Are they still married? Update the audience for that.
So I wish we knew. I mean, for to your last part of your question, we've had people who have seen them together before Bob Menendez went to prison a few weeks ago. He
Mm,
was still dining out at, steak restaurants in their neighborhood in New Jersey. So they're still together. But what's interesting about that is that when for his sentencing, the his lawyers asked people who've known him for many years, including his family members, to, write letters seeking mercy from the judge, saying he was a really great guy. And one of the most interesting letters that Tom and I found was from his daughter, Alicia, who actually gets into the dynamics of the relationship with the wife when she says, honestly, I don't understand his grace and forgiveness
hmm,
when he's taking care of his wife who was diagnosed with breast cancer during
right.
this whole thing. So her trial kept getting put off for medical reasons.
Hmm,
But that the daughter would say that she's surprised that he would still be, more than faithful to this woman who I guess the implication is that his family really thinks that he got into all of this because of her.
right.
These were her friends that she was introducing to Bob Menendez, but actually we found out that he knew people like Fred Davies in the community for years. So
Hmm,
she didn't introduce him to everybody that he got in trouble with. But she got into an accident in 2018 and ran over a pedestrian, killed him. She needed a new car. So one of the asks from these businessmen that they were helping was, well, I need a new Mercedes. And they got it for her after Bob had done all of these favors for the Egyptian government. And so these guys were the go-between between Bob Menendez and the Egyptian government. And one of the things that we found that Bob had done was sort of take the heat off of them when they were implicated in the death of the Saudi journalist
Khashoggi,
Jamal
right,
Khashoggi.
right.
And Tom has dug up some really interesting things about that Bob essentially lied when he said that the Saudis were responsible for his murder. Do you want to take that away, Tom? Because it's just so fascinating.
Yeah, Tom, let's
Yeah.
do let's do that because that was an international story and affected foreign policy. So tease that out for us.
Yeah, so what people should know is that up until now, all of the reporting has been that the Saudis and in specific the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBS,
Right.
Mohammed bin Salman, is who responsible for the murder and the dismemberment of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And so that's been the reporting to date. Well, Bob's trial comes up, and inside of the court documents, buried down way deep in there, and when we were digging through and doing the research for the book, I saw, well, wait a minute. The feds mentioned that Bob was helping the Egyptians cover up the murder and dismemberment of a prominent journalist. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Well, how many people could that be that got murdered and dismembered and were journalists?
And it was
There's only
an American resident.
and
Like
yeah,
they had
exactly.
that
There's
in
only
them.
one guy that fits the bill, and that's Jamal Khashoggi. So we started, researching it out for the book, and what we found was hey, one of the charges, what the part of Bob's conviction on acting as a foreign agent for Egypt was his work for Egypt in helping them hide their involvement in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And their involvement is massive because they provided the murder weapon. He was injected with drugs that killed him. So when you have reporting the way it is now, and and we scratched our head on this, we kept wondering, why is it that no one has figured out in the media that there's a situation where Bob was entangled with the Egyptians at the time that Jamal Khashoggi gets murdered, and the Egyptians provided the murder weapon. How has this never come up? And we've, after discussing it a lot, what we came back to is we noticed the first time that the CIA, and at that time Gina Haspel was the
Right.
head of CIA under and
Under
under
Joe Biden.
exactly when Gina Haspel, when she first came out with actually during that time it was under Trump, and she was in there under Trump, but when it first came out that the CIA had a report. Bob went and had a closed door meeting, him and a handful of other senators with the CIA, where they showed him the evidence. He comes out and he has an interview with Andrea Mitchell at MSNBC. And he tells them, after I've looked at the evidence with the CIA, it's all MBS over there in Saudi Arabia. It's all the crown prince. He puts it all on him. Well, here's the thing: when Bob saw the information from the CIA, he saw that the CIA saw that the Egyptians provided the murder weapon. And so for him to leave that briefing and go on national television, knowing he's being paid by the Egyptians,
Right.
knowing he just took all holds off of weapons for the Egyptians because they had holds placed on them for weapons because of human rights abuses. He removed all of those holds for them. This murder happens. He sees from the CIA that the guys paying him are involved in the murder, and he goes about a disinformation campaign in the mainstream media, blaming nothing but the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, never mentioning Egypt because those were his paymasters.
Now,
So
well,
yeah,
let me stop you for a sec. Now, so I get the contours of it, and then this goes all the way back to pre-Biden, and this is under the Trump initial his first tenure. I have to ask, in light of the fact that the Trump administration took so much incoming relative to his getting cozy with the Saudis, and the media was all over Trump about that, and Khashoggi was one of the levers they used to say,
Correct.
Donald Trump, you can't do business with these people; they're murderous. Why did the Trump administration not push back on this? Because very clearly, it was Menendez who framed the narrative that became the received wisdom. Did they not push back
they
on this?
did. They did push back. As a matter of fact, General Mattis pushed back. Um, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, pushed back. They went on national TV and told the world, "Look, we've looked at this CIA intel, and it does not say anywhere in there that the
Uh-huh.
Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia
So
did this."
in other words, he framed it a certain way, and let's be frank, he framed it in a way that the legacy media wanted to hear, and
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
became the narrative. Am I getting it right?
That's it.
Yes, you are. Yep.
That's
And then
it.
and
Wow.
we when we found that out, we were like, what? Like we can't believe how wrong the so-called legacy media got it. Like they didn't even go and interview Khashoggi's wife, who actually lives in Virginia. They only spoke to this young woman in Turkey who claimed to be his fiance. Like apparently he was going into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in order to get some kind of document so that he could marry this woman,
Right.
which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that, she became the spokesperson for him. So, and everybody ignored the fact that he had a widow in the DC suburbs. And we just discovered that like really a week ago because we called her up and I was like, wait a minute, you're his widow? And she said yes. And she's been silent the whole time because she said to me, Egypt is the real, Egypt is the real problem here. It was never the Saudis. Khashoggi was a Saudi. He was well connected. He wasn't always, in line with his own government, but he was well connected. His cousin was Adnan Khashoggi, the arms merchant.
Sure.
He had a relationship with Osama bin Laden. He'd interviewed him in Afghanistan when the Taliban were fighting the Soviets.
Right.
He'd had a falling out with him after 9/11, but still, there was somebody who was fairly prominent in Saudi Arabia. And it was the Egyptians who had the most to lose with the Arab Spring, which was taking place. The protests were taking place at that time, and they wanted Khashoggi out of the picture.
So realistically, he framed this in order to cover his clients, the
Mhm.
Egyptians, who were paying him. And this was, I assume, one of the charges that was brought against him, right? He was an unregistered agent for Egypt, and also this is a bribery scheme.
That's right.
So this strikes me, frankly, as a very big story because the absolute received wisdom is going to be yet another story that was too good to check for the Washington Post and the New York Times. The Washington Post really drove a lot of this story. And it turns out
And
that they got the story wrong.
The Khashoggi was their own
My
columnist.
point, exactly. And
Yeah.
they drove it and they just chose the narrative that worked for them essentially against Donald Trump. Let's be frank.
Yes.
That's right.
Wow, that's a big
That's right.
story. And I would argue that that is something that needs to really be sort of put forward relative to the book, because that's why books like this are important, because as opposed to the quick answer that you get sometimes in journalism, you can do the digging, you can really frame the story. And to me, this is a very big revelation. And I think that one really needs to, that one, see the light of day. So, Isabel, while I got you now, let me ask you this, because there's reporting in the book that his own background is pretty murky. He may not be the sort of rags to riches story that was sold to the Cuban community and ultimate to a Democratic constituency. What did you learn about who he really was and where he came from?
So Bob Menendez was born in Manhattan. His parents were both Cuban immigrants who came to the United States. And this is where it gets weird because his whole political career, he talks about how his family escaped Cuba because they were worried about having their assets confiscated. Well, you would think that that means they left after 59 when Fidel Castro came to power and did just that. He confiscated everybody's assets. But we dug deep and found that his mother actually had registered a Social Security card in the United States in 1951, which would mean that somehow they had already come to the United States. And we had a lot of difficulty. We checked ships manifests, we checked airplanes, we could not find a family. And when I talk about the family, it's his mother, his father, and his two siblings, his two older siblings, coming over to America in any of those years.
Hmm.
So it was, what was he lying about? What was he being murky about? The story of fleeing Fidel Castro for the people who ended up supporting his career was a much better story because they were all these anti-Castro um, militants who wanted to get rid of the Castro
And
regime.
he always played that. Am I wrong? Like, did he not
Yes.
use this idea that like he was a victim of Cuban espionage? Didn't he play that game?
Yes, he did. And we found that in the Dominican Republic, he may in fact have been the victim of Cuban espionage
Hmm.
with all of the things that he was involved with there. But the murkiness of his early life, and he actually wrote a biography. He actually wrote a memoir in 2006 called "Growing American Roots." And he talks in the memoir about how he's not going to give any details about his early life because he's too young.
Hmm.
And he, at the time that he writes it, he's almost 60. And I'm
Wow.
thinking, what? So there's something that he was always trying to hide in that origin story.
So he's got a little George Santos in him, which is we kind of really don't know who the guy is.
Right.
George Santos, of course, the Republican congressman who is now convicted and I believe in jail because there was some speculation that George Santos wasn't even his name. And it sounds like Menendez, there's a lot of questions there as well. Tom, let me come back to you. So, in light of that, I got to ask you, how hard was it to do the research here? Because there's a lot of people in New Jersey, and his roots are in New Jersey, you really don't want this story told. Did you bump into some hostility here?
Not we didn't bump into hostility. Mostly it was people who were willing to talk,
Hmm.
but they basically made us promise, look, you can't say my name. It's
Why? Why?
because
What were they worried about?
everyone was scared of the machine coming after him because, Bob, when you look in the book, we do a really good job of explaining this. Bob came up in that Union City, New Jersey mobster type
Yeah, tough,
atmosphere.
tough, tough environs. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. And that's where he learned all about politics. Like,
yeah,
everything about him as a politician is Union City, New Jersey.
right.
All of it.
Yeah.
And so when as he becomes a senator, as he rises, he builds an organization, a political organization around him that's very similar to how a mob boss would build an organization around himself.
Did he have any mob connections? Did that ever come up?
Yes, he did. He had Cuban mob connections that were very close to him personally.
Hmm.
Also, his biggest backers as a politician coming into the national scene
Hmm.
were Cuban mobsters. He definitely wrapped up into that. But at the same time, because of the Union City connections, he had real mobster connections there as well. And
Yeah.
when you look at even his co-defendants like Fred Davies,
Hmm.
Fred Davies is cited in a New Jersey report on corruption as someone who's very recently still paying members of different crime families,
Yeah.
sons of the head of different crime families. So
Yeah.
there are definitely mob connections here, and they're active ones and they're fresh connections. And on top of that, Bob is coming out of a tradition of sort of a mobster type organization when it comes to politics. So when you add it all together, the people who know anything, they also know that Bob is surrounded by this mobster type atmosphere, and they're all scared for their lives and their livelihood and for their family's livelihood, and rightfully so. Because even though Bob wore a good suit and even though Bob gave a good speech, that guy underneath it all is a true mob boss. There's no doubt
So
about it. Jail
that's
prisons were made for guys like him.
and he's in federal prison. You got to wonder, what his life there is going to be like. But with all of these connections, I suspect it's not quite as tough on him as it might be for some others because he's got all these connections and people don't realize there's a lot of that stuff still out there, and not just the Cubans, but the traditional Cosa Nostra, the LCN guys are still running around out there. New Jersey has a ton of it. It's under the Gambinos. I think that the Cavalcante family is still very prominent over there. These things are quieter than they used to be, but they're still there.
Mhm.
And what you start to see now emerging, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but what we got is a self made guy, background murky, comes up in a tough environment, is half a gangster, and had the kind of hubris where he thought he could kind of get away with anything because he was Bob Menendez and it had worked so far, and he's 80 years old. We're running out of time. Let me give you the last word, Tom, and then I'll come to you, Isabel. Anything else that you think that will be revelatory about the book? And Isabel, then I'm going to come to you just to frame when the book comes out. But Tom, last word to you.
Yeah, I think one of the big things about Bob's political career that hasn't been covered much in the media, and we really cover it well in the book, is his relationship with Hillary Clinton and the
Right,
Clintons.
right.
That's a big deal for him. I mean, she's his political godmother. She gave him wings when he didn't have, so he could rise to the top of the Senate as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. That was her. Okay, don't make no doubt about it. As
Hmm.
a matter of fact, him even getting into the Senate, where he was placed in there by Governor Corzine, right? Even that, I am sure, had a lot of Hillary influence on that as well. And so when people see what their relationship really was and what he did with that relationship, how he leveraged it to work within his group on things in the Dominican Republic and Panama and other places that caused him to cross so many wires politically that when you look at it, when we were looking at it, we thought, man, this guy is really he was out of control. He really was, and he was doing it with the power of the Clintons and with the power of the entire Democratic Party. So I
Do
think at
you
the
do
end,
you think? Let me press you now,
yeah.
since you say that. Do you think that Hillary could have come up in this case in a way that would have really exposed her, and maybe the prosecutors didn't go down that route?
Absolutely. I mean, the book we talk about a really big meeting he had at the Goldman Sachs building in 2012. Okay, and this would have come out if she would have been tried for anything with his corruption. It would have been for this. It was a huge meeting. He had the crown prince of Spain there, along with his wife. He had some of the biggest lobbyists in the world there. He had some of the biggest bankers in the world there. And after that happened, his cronies went out and they started to do partnerships on gold mines in the Dominican Republic. In Panama, there were shenanigans in the Dominican. All of a sudden, this international wave of business transactions burst after this Goldman Sachs meeting, and we believe in, and as we outline in the book, that was sort of the beginning of this guy's meteoric rise to power and to the echelons where he really got up there. But what happened in doing that is he actually set into stone or set into motion over all those years the pieces that actually brought down the Democratic Party in this last election in 2024. When you really look at it, and this is what I think the book is going to really reveal for people who pay attention closely, what you'll see is that the book acts almost as a guidebook for the downfall of the Democratic Party. Why they're still struggling to this day, why they can't get any footing. And the reason why is because people like Bob Menendez, and especially Bob Menendez, he redesigned the Democratic Party. It was no longer a party that was representing the little guy, the blue collar worker, the immigrant. It became a party that represented special interests, deep pocketed interests, sort of like what the Clintons were doing for years with the Clinton Foundation. He helped reorchestrate and re-put together the Democratic Party in that way so that it lost its soul, and the party itself from top to bottom, because of Bob's leadership, has become so corrupt they don't know up from down anymore. And that's what I think the book is going to really sink in for people who read it and pay attention.
This is so timely. We have all these investigations going on, including Russiagate. Hillary's name has been heavily implicated in that, as we all know. And I would not be surprised, given the sort of political patina that overlays everything you're talking about, everything that's coming out in Russiagate, et cetera, that we really start to see maybe some of the stuff that you guys have uncovered in this book, which is going to come out right in the heat of all of this, implicated in the upcoming grand jury stuff. I mean, I don't see there's any way to sort of avoid that if it goes to the level that you're talking about. What a timely book. Boy, this is going to be really something. Isabel, let me come to you for the last word. I got to ask you something. What's with the singing?
Oh, I love the singing. That just brought such an interesting element to everything. So every day when I was in court at the trial, at Bob Menendez's second trial, I used to get there super early because I wasn't a regular court reporter, so I was worried I wasn't going to get a seat. And the only other person who would be there was Bob Menendez, and he would be looking out the window and singing a song. And he did that every day. And I spoke to some people who had some lawyers who were watching the trial every day. And I said to them, does he do this all the time? And they said, yes. And I think it just calmed him down. But he was known as, he loved Broadway, and he loved to sing. And his wife, his second wife, said, that he would propose to her when he sang her a particular song. So she was always on eggshells waiting for him to sing to her. And he
Hmm.
did so in India in front of the Taj Mahal, which was like captured on video. And then, the New York Times wrote about the proposal. But in fact, there were a lot of elements that the Times got wrong in that then we went back and figured out. And they were actually important elements about when they'd actually met, because they had this whole fabricated story of when they met and how they met at an IHOP. And in fact, it was completely different.
It's amazing. Nothing about this guy seems to be genuine. Did you have any access to him? Did he deny a request to talk to you? That kind of a thing?
Every time I wrote a story about Bob Menendez for the New York Post, I reached out to him. I reached out to his attorneys. I reached out to Nadine. I reached out to her attorneys. Nothing.
Nothing. Well, that figures, especially since at the time, I'm sure he's appealing and everything else. But I think with what you guys have put together, there's going to be more to come to the Bob Menendez story. Gold Bar Bob. Tell us when the book comes out.
Book comes out October 14th, but it's available for pre-order anywhere you buy books now, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores. You can order it now and it'll actually come to you before October 14th if you do that.
That's terrific. And, look, I have an advanced copy. Folks, you got to check it out because it's one of those things where as you're reading it, you say, did this really happen in modern America? I'm sure you guys had a lot of moments like that where you said, this still goes on? Yes, it still goes on. And as Tom said, it has become so embedded in the Democratic Party. It's almost like we've all become inured to it. And I think that's why the book is so relevant and it's going to be so revelatory. And I think you guys are going to be part of the big news narrative going into the autumn because the book is so timely and penetrative. I want to congratulate you both. I think the book's going to do real well. I think it's a terrific achievement and it's well earned. Isabel, I follow your reporting, of course, in the New York Post these days, which sets the agenda nationally. So you guys are really in the catbird seat, and I appreciate both of you coming on. Folks, we're out of time. Once again, I am Paul Morrow for the Ops Desk. Gold Bar Bob coming out this October. All the bookstores, you can get it as a pre-order online. You got to jump on it because everybody's going to be talking about it. Once again, I am Paul Morrow. Thank you all for staying with us, and please be safe.